This is an LED replacement for typical Edison screw glass light bulbs. I actually had to put this in a vise and smash it with a hammer to break the glue loose. But this is just a diffuser to spread the light around. Inside we see two resistors to limit the current to the LEDs and prevent pretty much once you reach a forward voltage drop on the LEDs, they'll behave as though it's a dead short, and you'll wind up with too much current going through them, and they short out and blow up, and bad things happen. It has a voltage regulator, I believe. And probably the most interesting part of this, I get a screwdriver. Probably the most interesting part of this was I've seen a few of these. The power supply is actually at the back, stepping down the mains. But here it's this socket that goes through the board, and it's just two little pins. And so presumably if the LEDs are still good, you could power this with a DC source. Kind of like the modular design. But this was very interesting. Little power supply board inside. And I think that may be what's failing on this. Presumably the capacitor, because that's a nice toasty hot environment in there with no airflow. So let me find something sharp and stabby. And see if I can get this open. There's one wire. And I have no idea how I'm going to get this off. Well, there's something I can grab with pliers. Yeah, it doesn't work. Apologies for the coughing. I'm still getting over a cold. And having disassembled quite a few of these, I have to say this metal is considerably thinner and cheaper than most of the light bulbs I've taken apart. There we go. So it's just retained by, it just rails into those. And this is all aluminum, and there's a little bit of heatsink goop so that the screws pressing this against that will hopefully transfer some of the heat and help to keep things cool. And it appears I've broken that already. So, looks like full bridge rectifier. There's a resistor to take down the voltage on the capacitor, just so when you're handling the light bulb, if you remove it from the socket, then the capacitor is not storing a charge that will shock you if you're handling this. So is this 22 microfarad Topaz? That's not a brand I've ever heard of before. And the lid is not bulging on it. And I don't see any scorch marks. I'm trying to remember what a mauve is. Oh, this is probably helpful. Or not, because now nothing's in focus. Well, okay, there's something. Can I zoom in? Yes. So here they have the letters MOV and a schematic symbol. It's unpopulated. And I believe it stands for metal oxide varistor, which I think is just to deal with if you have inductive spikes, or like high voltage spikes in the supply line, then it doesn't blow up your electronics. Anyway, so full bridge rectifier, smoothing capacitor, with a rating of 200 volts. Frame. So we're about 120 volts here in the United States. But the sinusoidal curve which actually that's confusing. They went up to 200 volts because, well, maybe that's just so that this doesn't get killed by little inductive spikes because they don't have a MOV in there. So that would make sense. So that should rectify. Let me see. I would assume that would rectify to about 60 volts DC, but it would be rippling a lot, which isn't good for electronics. So you dump it all into a capacitor. So it's probably like 50 volts DC, but I'm just guessing. Anyway, so that's the power supply, and I was presuming that this is what had failed, but let's look at this guy. So DC comes in, and yeah, that's actually very curious. So it's labeled 94V, so I almost wonder if this is rated for running at 94 volts DC, but that's probably just a model number. Yeah, I don't know. Disclaimer, I'm not an electrical engineer, and I don't play one on television, but I'm interested. There doesn't appear to be any sort of markings on what I presume is a voltage regulator, but the failure mode it had gone into was flickering and then going down to just enough brightness that these were technically lit, but not really producing any usable light out of it. So I'll try running some DC through this and see if things light up still, and who knows. But there's I mean, typically I would see this same type of a wafer with a capacitor stuffed in, and then usually the rectification just on the board. This is the first time I've seen what looks like a voltage regulator on here. Really, the component count is significantly higher. So that's a very interesting little power supply. You could almost, if you felt like you wanted to play Russian roulette with your life, you could probably just slot this into a breadboard if you needed higher DC voltage for something, but that would not be recommended. There are a lot of safer options out there. Anyway, this is typically what I do with everything that breaks. Tear it apart and, on its way to the dump, find out how it's made and maybe what failed on it. Anyway, thank you for watching.